The mushrooms grew best after rain, and it had rained for 3 days straight. Evelyn Hartwell pulled on her boots at 6:47 in the morning, laced them tight, and stepped out onto the porch of her cabin with a wicker basket in one hand and a walking stick in the other. The air was cold enough to see her breath. October in the Cascade foothills smelled like wet pine and rotting leaves in the faint mineral tang of creek water running high. She was 72 years old. Her hair was white, cut short and practical. Her hands were spotted with age, but they didn't shake. She'd been a nurse for 40 years, 22 of those in the army stationed in West Germany during the Cold War, back when the wall was still standing and the threat of war felt like a weight pressing down on every breath you took. She'd seen men die from things that shouldn't have killed them and survive things that should have. She learned early that panic was a choice and she chose not to make it. Her husband Tom had died 15 years ago. Logging accident. A widowmaker branch came down during a routine cut and crushed him before anyone could shout a warning. They'd been married 32 years. No children. Well, that wasn't quite true. They'd had Sarah. But Sarah was gone too. 5 years now. Overdose. Fentanyl-laced heroin in a motel room 2 counties over. The police had called Evelyn at 2 in the morning, and she'd driven there in the rain, and when she saw her daughter's body on that stained mattress, something inside her had gone cold and never warmed back up. Sarah had been 35. Evelyn blamed a lot of people for what happened to her daughter. The dealers, the so-called friends who enabled her, the system that failed her over and over. And yes, she blamed the bikers, the men in leather vests who rode through towns like Ridgeline, in packs trailing noise and menace, in a culture that romanticized the very things that had killed her child. She knew it wasn't fair to blame all of them. She knew addiction was more complicated than that. But grief doesn't care about fairness. Grief just sits in your chest like a stone and colors everything you see. Ridgeline, Oregon, population 782, sat at the end of a 2-lane highway that most people only used as a shortcut to somewhere else. It had one main street, a general store, a diner, a gas station, a post office, and a volunteer fire department that doubled as the community center. Evelyn had lived here her whole life except for the years in the army. She knew every family, every scandal, every secret that the town pretended didn't exist. After Tom died, after Sarah died, she'd retreated to the cabin they'd built together a 1.5 miles outside town, where the road turned to gravel and then dirt and then just stopped. She didn't have a cell phone, didn't want one, didn't see the point. If someone needed her, they could call the landline or drive out. Most people didn't. The forest behind her cabin stretched for miles, old-growth Douglas fir and western hemlock, some of the trees older than the state itself. She walked the trails every week, had done so for 50 years. She knew where the chanterelles grew in the fall, where the morels appeared in spring, where the huckleberries ripened in summer. The forest was her church, the only place she felt close to anything resembling peace. She took the ridge trail, the same one she always took her boots, crunching on wet pine needles. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the trees still dripped. A raven called from somewhere high up, a sound like rusty hinges. She ignored it and kept walking, eyes on the ground, looking for the telltale shape of mushroom caps pushing through the loam. 15 minutes in, she heard something. Not a raven, not the wind, a low guttural sound. Human. A groan. She stopped. Listened. There it was again. Off to her left, past the ridge down the slope where the trees grew thick and the underbrush turned to sword ferns and devil's club. Evelyn adjusted her grip on the walking stick and moved toward the sound. She didn't call out, didn't announce herself. Old instincts from the field hospital kicked in. Assess first, react second. The slope was steep. She had to grab at branches to keep from sliding. Her knees complained, but she ignored them. The groaning got louder. Then she heard metal, a chain rattling against wood. She came out into a small clearing, maybe 30 feet across, and stopped dead. 4 men, chained to an enormous Douglas fir in the center of the clearing. The tree was at least 6 feet in diameter, the kind of ancient giant that loggers used to call cathedral trees. Heavy logging chain, the kind used to drag timber out of the woods, looped twice around the trunk and through the men's wrists, pulled tight behind their backs. Padlocked. The men were in bad shape, faces swollen, blood dried in their beards, leather vests torn open, boots missing. One of them wasn't moving at all, his head tilted forward, chin against his chest. Another had his eyes closed, breathing in shallow, rapid gasps. The third was staring at nothing, his mouth slightly open, a thin line of drool running down into his beard. The fourth man, the biggest one, opened one eye when Evelyn stepped into the clearing. His left eye was swollen shut, a purple bruise spreading from his temple to his jawline. His right eye fixed on her. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a croak. Evelyn's training took over. The nurse in her, the soldier, the woman who'd spent 2 decades in emergency situations, moved forward without thinking. She walked closer, cataloging injuries: hypothermia, dehydration, contusions, possible broken bones. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s overnight. They'd been out here for hours, maybe longer. She knelt down in front of the big man. His vest had patches. She recognized the design, the death's head, the red and white lettering. Hell's Angels. Her stomach tightened. Of course. Of course it was them. "Can you hear me?" she asked. The man's eye focused on her. He nodded just barely. "How long have you been here?" He swallowed. His throat clicked. "Since last night, maybe 10. 12 hours, give or take." Evelyn looked at his wrists. The skin underneath the chain was raw, bleeding, the flesh torn down to muscle in places where he'd tried to pull free. She looked at the other 3 men. The one who wasn't moving, his lips were blue. That wasn't good. "Who did this to you?" she asked. "Doesn't matter," the big man whispered. "They're coming back." Evelyn stood up and turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. No one. Just the sound of water dripping from branches and the faint rustle of wind high in the canopy. She looked back at the men. "I'm going to get help," she said. "No time," the big man said. "They said they were coming back to finish it." Evelyn stared at him. Finish it. That meant kill them. Leave them here to die of exposure or come back and do it themselves. She should walk away. She should leave them here and go home and call the sheriff and let him deal with it. These were Hell's Angels. These were the kind of men who sold drugs and ran guns and destroyed lives. These were the kind of men who might have sold the heroin that killed her daughter. She looked at the man who wasn't moving. His chest rose and fell barely. She'd seen that breathing before. Shallow, thready. He was shutting down. Evelyn Hartwell had taken an oath once, a long time ago. First, do no harm. She hadn't thought about that oath in years, not really. But it was still there, buried under all the grief and anger and bitterness. And right now, in this clearing, with 4 men chained to a tree and dying in front of her, the oath was louder than everything else. "I'll be back," she said. She turned and ran, not a jog, a run, as fast as her 72-year-old legs could carry her. Back up the slope, grabbing branches, her boots slipping on wet leaves. Her heart hammered in her chest. Her breath came in short gasps. She crested the ridge and kept going down the trail through the trees, her walking stick forgotten somewhere behind her. The cabin was a 1.5 miles away. She covered it in 23 minutes, the fastest she'd moved in a decade. She burst through the front door, grabbed the landline phone, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? 4 men, Evelyn gasped, chained to a tree, past the ridge trail, 1/2 mile past the marker rock. They're injured, hypothermia. They need an ambulance, now. "Ma'am, can you—" "I'm Evelyn Hartwell. I live at 1447 Timber Creek Road. The men are in the woods behind my property. Send someone. Now." She hung up, stood there for a moment, bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. Then she dialed another number. Walter Dawson, her closest neighbor, 3/4 mile down the road. He answered on the second ring. "Walter," she said, "I need your help, now." "Evie, what's wrong?" 4 men chained to a tree in the woods. "I called 911, but I need bolt cutters and water and blankets. Can you meet me?" There was a pause. Then Walter said, "I'll be there in 5 minutes." He was there in 4. His truck rumbled up her driveway, and he got out carrying a toolbox, a gallon jug of water, and an old wool blanket. Walter Dawson was 68 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with a white beard and hands scarred from 40 years of hard labor. He'd worked in the mines up north before they closed then, as a timber faller, then in road construction. He'd lived in Ridgeline his whole life. He knew Evelyn the way people in small towns know each other, which is to say he knew her well enough to respect her and not ask too many questions. "What happened?" he asked as they loaded into his truck. "I don't know," Evelyn said. "I found them. They're in bad shape." "Who are they?" She hesitated. "Bikers." Walter's expression didn't change, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. Hell's Angels. Yes. He drove without speaking for a long moment. Then he said, I used to know some of them. Long time ago. Evelyn looked at him. What do you mean? I was a prospect once. 1974. I was young and stupid and thought it sounded like freedom. He kept his eyes on the road. I got out before I patched in, realized it wasn't for me. But I still know how they think. And if someone chained up 4 of their guys, this isn't over. Not even close. They drove as far as the logging road would take them, then hiked the rest of the way. Walter carried the bolt cutters. Evelyn carried the water and blanket. Her legs burned. Her lungs burned. She didn't slow down. When they reached the clearing, everything was exactly as she'd left it. 4 men, 1 tree, chains. Walter knelt down next to the big man and examined the padlock. Industrial grade, he muttered. Someone came prepared. He positioned the bolt cutters on the chain and squeezed. The chain snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the trees. The big man's arms dropped to his sides. He groaned a sound of pure relief and agony. His shoulders had been wrenched back for so long that the muscles had seized. Evelyn knelt beside him and gently moved his arms forward. He hissed through his teeth, but didn't pull away. What's your name? She asked. Garrett, he said. I'm Evelyn. I'm a nurse. Can you stand? He tried, got halfway up, then his legs gave out. Walter caught him and eased him back against the tree. Just sit, Evelyn said. She uncapped the water and held it to his lips. Slow, don't chug. Garrett drank. Water ran down his chin. He closed his eyes. Walter moved to the next man. Cut the chain, then the next, then the 4th, the one who hadn't moved. When the chain fell away, the man slumped forward. Evelyn caught him and lowered him to the ground. His skin was cold, clammy. His pulse was weak and rapid. This one's critical, she said to Walter. Severe hypothermia, possible internal injuries. She wrapped the blanket around him and checked his pupils. Unresponsive. She tilted his head back and made sure his airway was clear. His breathing was shallow but steady. For now. What's his name? She asked Garrett. Garrett opened his eyes, looked at the unconscious man. His face went tight. Roach, he said. His name is Roach. The name hit Evelyn like a slap. Roach. She knew that name. She'd heard it before years ago in a conversation she tried to forget. Sarah, high out of her mind, rambling about a guy named Roach who'd tried to get her into rehab, who'd told her she was going to die if she didn't stop. Evelyn had dismissed it at the time. Another lie, another manipulation. Addicts lied. That's what they did. But now kneeling next to this broken man in the woods, she wondered, could this be the same person? She looked at his vest, the patches, the Hell's Angels insignia. It was possible. It was more than possible. She pushed the thought away. It didn't matter. Right now, he was just a patient, just a man who needed help. The sound of sirens broke through the trees. Oh, trees. Faint at first, then louder. Walter stood up and waved his arms. Over here. 2 sheriff's deputies came crashing through the underbrush, followed by 2 paramedics carrying gear. Evelyn stepped back and let them work. The paramedics loaded Roach onto a stretcher. One of them looked at Evelyn. You the one who called it in? Yes. Good call. Another hour and he'd be gone. They carried him out. The deputies took statements from Garrett and the other 2 men whose names were Pike and Harlan. Garrett gave them the basics. They'd been riding back from a meeting in Creswell. A van cut them off on a back road. 6 men with bats and chains. They were outnumbered, ambushed, dragged into the woods. Their bikes were loaded onto a flatbed and taken. Their phones were smashed. Who did this? One of the deputies asked. Garrett just looked at him. Iron Reapers. The deputy's face went pale. He wrote something in his notebook and didn't ask any more questions. Evelyn sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing. One of the younger deputies brought her a bottle of water. She drank it slowly, watching the paramedics work. Watching the deputies take photos of the scene. Watching Garrett sit on the tailgate of Walter's truck with his head in his hands. Walter came over and sat down next to her. You did good, Evie. She didn't feel good. She felt exhausted, hollowed out. She looked at him. You said you knew them, the Hell's Angels. Some of them, not these guys. What happens now? Walter was quiet for a long time. Then he said, they'll call their people, and their people will come, and this town is about to get very complicated very fast. A black pickup truck appeared at the far end of the logging road. It stopped about 50 yards away. 3 men got out. They stood by the truck, arms crossed, watching the scene. Evelyn could see their vests, different patches, different colors. Garrett saw them too. He stood up so fast the truck rocked. His face, already battered and swollen, went completely rigid. He stared at the 3 men. They stared back. One of the men pulled out a phone, made a call, 10 seconds, maybe less. Then all 3 got back in the truck and drove away. Garrett turned to the nearest deputy. "I need to use your radio." "Why, Juanta?" "Because those were Iron Reapers. They just saw that we're alive and free and surrounded by cops, and they're going to tell their people, which means I need to tell mine. Right now." The deputy hesitated, then he handed over the radio. Garrett keyed the mic, gave a code, waited. A voice crackled back. Garrett spoke quickly, urgently. Evelyn couldn't make out all the words, but she heard enough. "4 of us, chained, beaten, Iron Reapers. They're still in the area. We need everyone, now." He handed the radio back, looked at the deputy. "You should call your sheriff. Tell him to get ready, because in about 3 hours, this town is going to be full of people he doesn't want here." The deputy stared at him. "How many people?" Garrett's expression didn't change. "All of them." Evelyn stood up. She felt cold. Not from the weather, from something else. A sense of inevitability, like watching a wave build on the horizon and knowing you can't outrun it. Walter touched her arm. "Come on, I'll drive you home." "I can't just leave. There's nothing more you can do here. They've got medical. They've got law enforcement. You did your part." She let him lead her back to the truck. They drove in silence. When they reached her cabin, she got out and stood in the driveway looking back toward the woods. She couldn't see the clearing from here, but she knew it was there. She knew what she'd found, and she knew deep in her bones that this wasn't over. "Walter," she said, "what you said before about being a prospect." He didn't look at her. That was a long time ago. "Do they know the Hells Angels? Do they know you were almost one of them?" "Some of the old-timers might. Most of them are dead or in prison. The ones still around, I don't know. Maybe. And the fact that you left, that you didn't patch in." Walter's jaw tightened. "In their world, that's a betrayal. You don't just walk away. You're either in or you're out. And if you're out, you're dead to them. Or worse." "Worse?" He looked at her then. His eyes were hard. "There are things worse than being dead to them, Evie. Things they do to people who betray the club. Things that make you wish you were dead." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you in danger?" "I don't know, maybe, if the wrong person recognizes me, if the wrong story gets told." He shrugged. "But that's my problem, not yours." "It became my problem the moment I found those men." Walter didn't argue, he just nodded. "Get some rest, and lock your doors tonight." He drove away. Evelyn went inside and locked the door. She sat at her kitchen table and stared at the wall. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know if it was adrenaline or fear, or something else. She'd saved 4 men's lives today. 4 men who, by all rights, she should have left to die. 4 men who represented everything she hated, everything she blamed for her daughter's death. And one of them might be the man who tried to save Sarah. She thought about Roach unconscious on that stretcher, his skin gray and cold. She thought about the way Garrett had said his name, the way his face had tightened. There was history there, connection. These men weren't just random club members, they mattered to each other. The phone rang. Evelyn jumped. She picked it up. "Evelyn Hartwell." "Yes." "This is Sheriff Bill Pruitt. I understand you're the one who found the men in the woods." "That's right." "I'm going to need a statement from you. Can you come into the station tomorrow morning?" "I can do that." There was a pause, then Pruitt said, "Ma'am, I don't know if you're aware, but the situation we're dealing with here is complicated. The men you found are members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The men who attacked them are members of a rival club called the Iron Reapers. This is gang activity. This is organized crime, and it's about to get a lot worse before it gets better." "I understand. Do you?" "Because in about 2 hours, we're expecting a significant number of Hells Angels members to arrive in Ridgeline. They're coming from all over the state, maybe further. And when they get here, I don't know what's going to happen. But I need you to stay home. Make your doors. Don't go out unless it's an emergency. Sheriff, I'm 72 years old. I've lived through a lot worse than a bunch of motorcycles. Ma'am, with all due respect, you haven't lived through this. He hung up. Evelyn set the phone down. She walked to the window and looked out at the trees. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It was beautiful, peaceful, the kind of evening that made you forget the world was full of violence and cruelty. But Evelyn didn't forget. She never forgot. She went to her bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf in the back was a wooden box. She took it down and opened it. Inside was a Colt .45 service pistol, the one Tom had carried when he was in the Army. She'd kept it after he died, cleaned it once a year, never fired it. She took it out now and checked the magazine, fully loaded. She set it on her nightstand and went back to the kitchen. Made herself a cup of tea, sat down at the table, and waited. The first sound came at 6:47 in the evening, a low rumble in the distance growing louder. Engines, lots of them. Evelyn stood up and walked to the front window. She couldn't see the road from here, but she could hear them. A deep thrumming roar that vibrated through the ground and rattled the glass in the window panes. They were coming. She thought about Garrett sitting in that hospital, or wherever they'd taken him making phone calls. She thought about Stokes, whoever he was, the regional president, the man with the power to summon hundreds of riders with a single word. She thought about the Iron Reapers, the men who'd chained 4 people to a tree and beaten them and left them to die. And she thought about herself, an old woman, a nurse, a mother who'd failed to save her own daughter, standing in her cabin at the edge of the woods listening to the sound of war rolling toward her town. She picked up her tea and took a sip. It was cold. She set it down. The engines got louder. By 7:30 in the evening, the first wave hit Ridgeline. 43 motorcycles riding in a tight column, engines synchronized, moving through the town like a slow-rolling thunderstorm. People came out of their houses, stood on their porches, watched. The bikers didn't stop. They rode through Main Street, turned onto Highway 26 and kept going. 5 minutes later, another wave. 36 bikes this time. Then another, then another. By 8 o'clock, Ridgeline's population had doubled. By 9 o'clock, it had tripled. Motorcycles lined every available stretch of road. Men and women in leather vests stood in groups talking in low voices, smoking, watching. The diner stayed open. The gas station stayed open. Everything else locked its doors. Sheriff Pruitt stood on the steps of the municipal building and watched his town fill up with people he had no control over. He'd called for state police backup. They were coming, but they wouldn't arrive until morning. For now, he had 6 deputies and a town full of outlaw bikers. He saw the black SUV pull up in front of the diner. 2 men got out. One was tall, lean, silver-haired, his vest covered in patches. The other was younger, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left ear to his collarbone. They walked into the diner like they owned it. Pruitt followed them inside. The silver-haired man was sitting in a booth drinking coffee. He looked up when Pruitt approached. His eyes were pale blue, cold as January. "Sheriff," the man said, "you must be Stokes." "That's right." Pruitt sat down across from him. "We need to talk." "I agree. What are you doing here?" Stokes took a sip of coffee, set the cup down. "4 of my men were chained to a tree and beaten within an inch of their lives. One of them is my son. The people who did it are still out there. So I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen again. By bringing an army into my town, by making sure the Iron Reapers understand that there are consequences. That's my job, not yours." Stokes smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "With all due respect, Sheriff, your job is to enforce the law. My job is to protect my family. And right now, those 2 things are pointing in the same direction. So let's not pretend we're enemies." Pruitt studied him. "What do you want?" "2 things. I want the men who did this arrested and charged, and I want to meet the woman who found them." "Why, Brian?" "Because she saved my son's life, and I owe her." Pruitt leaned back. "The woman is 72 years old. She's not involved in this. I know exactly who she is. Evelyn Hartwell, retired Army nurse, widow, lost her daughter to an overdose 5 years ago." Stokes's expression didn't change. "I know she has every reason to hate people like me, and I know she helped us anyway. That means something. She's not going to meet with you. Ask her. If she says no, I'll respect that. But ask her." Pruitt stood on up. I'll ask, but if she says no, you and your people leave tonight. Stokes nodded. Fair enough. Pruitt drove out to Evelyn's cabin. The road was dark, lined with pine trees that blocked out the stars. He could still hear the engines in the distance, a constant background hum. When he pulled into her driveway, he saw her standing on the porch with arms crossed, watching him. He got out of the car. Mrs. Hartwell. Sheriff, can we talk? That's why you're here, isn't it? He walked up onto the preton. She didn't invite him inside. They stood there in the cold, their breath misting in the air. The Hells Angels regional president wants to meet you, Pruitt said. Wife bum. To thank you, you saved his son. Evelyn's face didn't change. Which one? The one in critical condition. Roach. His real name is Danny Stokes. Danny, the name echoed in Evelyn's head. Danny Stokes. Roach. The man who might have tried to save her daughter. The man whose father had just brought an army to her town. I don't want to meet him, she said. I understand, but he's not going to leave until he does. That's not my problem. It is actually, because right now there are 89 motorcycles in Ridgeline and more coming every hour. And the only reason they're not tearing this town apart looking for the Iron Reapers is because Stokes is holding them back. If you meet with him, if you let him thank you, he'll leave. He gave me his word. Evelyn stared at him. And you believe him? I don't know, but I don't have a lot of options. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, where? The diner. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Fine. Pruitt nodded. Thank you. He left. Evelyn went back inside and locked the door. She sat at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in 5 years. But she felt the weight of everything pressing down on her, the grief and the anger and the exhaustion and the terrible, unbearable irony of it all. She'd saved the son of a man who ran a criminal organization. She'd saved a man who might have known her daughter. And tomorrow she was going to sit across from a man who represented everything she hated and let him thank her. The engines rumbled in the distance. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. Evelyn didn't sleep. She lay in bed and listened to the sound of motorcycles rolling through Ridgeline all night. By 3 in the morning, the noise had faded to an occasional rumble. By 5, it was quiet again. She got up at 6, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen table watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale blue. At 7:30, she got dressed. Clean jeans, a flannel shirt, her old army jacket, the one with the medical corps insignia still sewn on the shoulder. She didn't know why she chose that jacket. Maybe she wanted to remind herself who she was. Maybe she wanted to remind Stokes. She drove into town in her truck, an old Ford that Tom had rebuilt twice, and that she kept running through sheer stubbornness. Main Street looked like something out of a movie. Motorcycles lined both sides of the road as far as she could see. Harley Davidsons mostly. Chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Men and women in leather vests stood in clusters, drinking coffee from paper cups, smoking cigarettes, talking in low voices. They watched her truck pass. Some of them nodded. Most just stared. Evelyn parked in front of the diner, took a breath, got out. The door chimed when she walked in. The diner was full. Every booth, every stool at the counter. All bikers. The conversation died the moment she entered. Everyone turned to look at her. Sheriff Pruitt was sitting in a booth near the back. He stood up and waved her over. Sitting across from him was the silver-haired man, Stokes. He stood when she approached. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and even at 67 years old, he moved like a man who'd spent his life in motion. His eyes were pale blue, sharp, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, thank you for coming. Evelyn didn't take his offered hand. She slid into the booth next to Pruitt. Stokes sat back down. I'll make this quick, Stokes said. You saved my son's life yesterday. The doctors told me if he'd been in those woods another 2 hours, his organs would have started shutting down. He'd be dead. You found him. You got help. You didn't have to do that. I'm a nurse, Evelyn said. I took an oath. So did a lot of people. Most of them would have walked away. I'm not most people. Stokes smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was real. No, you're not. He reached into his vest and pulled out a coin, bronze worn smooth on one side. On the other, a death's head insignia. He set it on the table between them. This is a challenge coin, he said. It means you're under our protection. Anywhere, anytime. Anyone wearing our patch sees this, they know your family. Evelyn stared at the bronze disc, didn't touch it. I don't want to be part of your family. I understand, but this isn't about what you want. It's about what I owe you, and I pay my debts. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Stokes leaned forward. My son is alive because of you. That's not nothing. That's everything. Evelyn finally looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the lines around his eyes, the scars on his knuckles, the tattoos disappearing under his collar. She saw a man who'd lived a hard life and made hard choices and survived. She also saw a father, a man who'd almost lost his son. Your son, she said. Roach, Danny, what can you tell me about him? Stokes' expression shifted. Something guarded came into his eyes. Why? Because I think I knew him, or knew of him, 5 years ago. My daughter was an addict. Heroin. She mentioned a man named Roach who tried to get her into rehab. The diner was completely silent. Everyone was listening now, even though they pretended not to be. Stokes was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What was your daughter's name?" Sarah Hartwell. Something passed across Stokes' face. Recognition. Pain. He closed his eyes, opened them. Yeah, Danny knew her. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists under the table. How time? He was using at the time. This was 6, 7 years ago. He was in bad shape, worse than bad. He met Sarah at a meeting. N.A. They were both trying to get clean. They became friends. Stokes paused. Danny told me about her. He said she was smart, funny, said she reminded him of his sister. Did he give her drugs? No. Stokes' voice was firm. Danny was a lot of things, but he wasn't a dealer. He tried to help her. He got her into a program, paid for it himself, but she left after 3 days, went back to using. And then she died. And then she died. Stokes looked down at the table. Danny took it hard, real hard. He stayed sober for 2 months after that. Then he relapsed, stayed in the life for another year before he got serious about recovery. He's been clean for 4 years now. Evelyn felt something crack open inside her chest. All this time she'd blamed everyone. The dealers, the friends, the culture. And here was a man telling her that his son, a Hell's Angel, a criminal, had tried to save Sarah, had cared about her, had mourned her. I didn't know, she said quietly. How could you? She looked at the coin on the table, picked it up, turned it over in her hands. It was heavier than she expected. Is he going to be okay, Danny? The doctors say yes, he's stable. They're keeping him for observation, but he's going to make it. Stokes paused. Thanks to you. Evelyn slipped the coin into her jacket pocket. I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, that's why it matters. Sheriff Pruitt cleared his throat. Mr. Stokes, you said if Mrs. Hartwell met with you, you'd leave town. Stokes nodded. I said I'd leave peacefully, and I will, but I'm not leaving until the men who did this are caught. That's my job. Then do it. Stokes reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handed it to Pruitt. Names, addresses, the 7 Iron Reapers who planned and executed the attack. That's everything you need. Pruitt unfolded the paper, read it, looked at Stokes. How did you get this? Does it matter? It matters in court. Then don't use it in court. Use it to find them. Once you find them, I'm sure you'll find plenty of evidence to make charges stick. Stokes stood up. I'm giving this to you instead of handling it myself. You understand what that means. It means you're choosing law over revenge. This time, Stokes looked at Evelyn. Because of her. Because she did the right thing, I'm doing the right thing. But if those men aren't arrested, if they're not charged, if they walk free, then I'll handle it my way. And you won't like my way. He walked out. The diner erupted in noise the moment the door closed behind him. Bikers stood up, threw money on tables, and filed out. Within 5 minutes, the place was empty except for Evelyn Pruitt and the waitress who stood behind the counter, looking shell-shocked. Pruitt looked at the piece of paper in his hands, then at Evelyn. Are you okay? I don't know. What he said about his son, about your daughter. I heard him. Do you believe him? Evelyn thought about it, thought about Sarah, thought about all the times she'd lied, manipulated, stolen, Thought about all the times Evelyn had wanted to believe her and couldn't, and thought about the fact that Stokes had nothing to gain by lying about this, nothing except maybe easing the conscience of an old woman he'd never see again. Yeah, she said, I believe him. She drove home. The roads were still full of motorcycles, but they were starting to thin out. Small groups rolling away, heading north, heading south, heading back to wherever they'd come from. By noon, half of them were gone. By sunset, only about 20 remained. But Ridgeline didn't relax. If anything, the tension got worse. Evelyn stopped at the general store to buy milk and bread. The owner, Jim Hollis, a man she'd known for 40 years, barely looked at her when she walked in. Morning, Jim. He grunted. Didn't respond. Evelyn picked up what she needed and brought it to the counter. Jim rang it up without making eye contact. That'll be $8.47. She handed him a 10. He gave her change. She waited for him to say something, anything, but he just stood there staring at the register. Jim, are you okay? Am I okay? He looked at her then. His face was red. You brought those people here, Evelyn. I didn't bring anyone. I found 4 men who needed help. You should have left them there. The words hit her like a slap. She stared at him. They would have died. Maybe, but now we've got a war brewing in our town. You know what happened this morning? 3 Iron Reapers got picked up by state police on Highway 26. You know why? Because someone tipped them off. Someone from that biker gang you saved. And now the Iron Reapers know where those tips came from. They know Ridgeline is Hell's Angels territory now. You made us a target. I saved 4 lives. You endangered 800. Evelyn picked up her bag and walked out. Her hands were shaking. She got in her truck and sat there for a moment trying to calm down. She'd known there would be consequences. She'd known the town would react. But she hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be blamed. She drove home and didn't go back into town for 3 days. On the 4th day, Nancy Simmons showed up at her door. Nancy lived half a mile down the road, a woman in her early 60s who Evelyn had known since Nancy was a child. They'd been friendly, not friends exactly, but friendly. Neighbors who helped each other out. Nancy didn't come inside. She stood on the porch with her arms crossed. I'm moving, she said. What? My daughter called. She wants me to move to Eugene, closer to her, and I'm going. Nancy, that's wonderful. I know you've wanted to. I'm moving because of you. Evelyn stopped. What? My house has been on the market for 2 years. No offers. Not one. You know why? Because Ridgeline is a dying town. No jobs, no future. The only thing we had going for us was that it was quiet, safe, and now it's not. Nancy's voice shook. There were 89 motorcycles in this town last week. 89 gang members, criminals, and they came because of you. They came because 4 of their people were attacked. And you're the one who found them. You're the one who saved them. You're the one who made this town matter to them. And now we're going to pay for it. Forever. Nancy, my daughter told me to get out while I still can, before property values drop even more, before this place becomes known as Hell's Angels territory, before it becomes a target. She turned to leave, stopped, looked back. You did what you thought was right. I understand that. But you didn't think about the rest of us. You didn't think about what it would pen. She walked to her car and drove away. Evelyn stood on the porch for a long time. Then she went inside and sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. That night she called Walter. Evie, you okay? No. What happened? She told him. About Jim at the store, about Nancy, about the way people were looking at her now when they looked at her at all. Walter was quiet for a long time. Then he said, it's fear. People are scared. They don't understand what happened, so they're looking for someone to blame. They're blaming me. I know. Did I do the wrong thing? No, you did the hard thing, and the hard thing is never popular. Evelyn closed her eyes. I don't know if I can stay here, Walter. Where would you go? I don't know. Somewhere else. Somewhere I'm not the woman who brought a war to town. You didn't bring a war. You stopped one from being worse. If you hadn't found those men, if they'd died in those woods, there would have been 100 bikers here instead of 89. And they wouldn't have left peacefully. They would have burned this town to the ground looking for revenge. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I know how they think. I know what they value. And the fact that you saved their people, the fact that you showed them mercy when you had every reason not to, that's the only reason this town is still standing. Evelyn wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that what she'd done mattered. But all she could hear was Nancy's voice. You didn't think about the rest of us. I need to go, she said. Evie, she hung up. The days blurred together. Evelyn stopped going into town. She had enough supplies to last a few weeks. She spent her time in the woods, walking the trails, gathering mushrooms, trying to find the peace she'd always found there. But the peace was gone. Every time she walked past the clearing where she'd found the men, she felt a tightness in her chest. A weight. 2 weeks after the incident, Sheriff Pruitt called her. Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted to update you. We arrested all 7 Iron Reapers. The DA is moving forward with charges. Kidnapping, aggravated assault theft. They're looking at serious time. That's good. There's something else. Danny Stokes was released from the hospital yesterday. He's recovering well. He asked about you. Evelyn's heart skipped. What did he ask? He wanted to know if you were okay. He heard about the way the town's been treating you. How did he hear that? Mrs. Hartwell, there are still Hells Angels members in Ridgeline. Not many, maybe 5 or 6, but they're keeping an eye on things. They're keeping an eye on you. I don't need them to protect me. I don't think it's about protection. I think it's about respect. You saved their people. In their world, that means something. Evelyn didn't respond. There's one more thing, Pruitt said. Stokes asked if you'd be willing to meet with Danny when he's feeling up to it. He wants to thank you himself. I don't know. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. She hung up, sat at the kitchen table, stared at the challenge coin, which she'd placed on the windowsill. The bronze caught the afternoon light. 3 days later, Walter showed up at her cabin. He looked agitated. What's wrong? Evelyn asked. I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. They sat on the porch. Walter took off his hat and turned it over in his hands. I told you I was a prospect in 1974. That's true. What I didn't tell you is why I left. He paused. There was a guy, another prospect. Name was Terry Madsen. Good guy. We came up together. One night we were at a bar and Terry got into it with a full patch member. Just a stupid argument about a pool game. But the member took it personal. He told Terry to apologize. Terry refused, said he didn't do anything wrong. Walter's jaw tightened. They took Terry out back, beat him, bad, broke his ribs, broke his jaw. I was there. I watched it happen. And I didn't do anything. I was too scared, too worried about my own future with the club. What happened to Terry? He left the hospital 2 days later and disappeared. Never saw him again. Never heard from him again. I think he's dead. I think they killed him for disrespecting a patch. Walter looked at Evelyn. I left the club the next day, told them I was out. They didn't try to stop me. I wasn't patched yet, so I wasn't bound. But I've carried that with me every day since. The fact that I stood there and did nothing while they destroyed a man. Why are you telling me this now? Because when I saw those men chained to that tree, I had a choice. I could walk away, pretend I didn't know anything, or I could help, and I chose to help, not because I was trying to make up for what I didn't do in 1974, but because I didn't want to be that person again, the person who stands by and does nothing. He put his hat back on. You're catching hell from this town because you did the right thing, and I want you to know that you're not alone. What you did took guts. It took character. And anyone who says otherwise is a coward. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them back. Thank you, Walter. Don't thank me. Just don't let them make you regret it. He left. Evelyn sat on the porch and watched the sun set through the trees. That night she made a decision. She would meet Danny Stokes. Not because she owed him anything, not because his father had given her a coin, but because she needed to know. She needed to know if the man she'd saved was the same man who tried to save her daughter. She needed to know if Sarah's death had meant something to him, if she'd been more than just another addict who couldn't get clean. She called Sheriff Pruitt the next morning. I'll meet with him, she said. The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday. Neutral ground. The Ridgeline Community Center, which was really just a large room attached to the fire station. Pruitt would be there. So would Walter at Evelyn's request. Danny Stokes arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He came alone on a motorcycle that was so loud it rattled the windows. He was a big man, well over 6 feet, with a shaved head and a thick beard. His face still bore the marks of the beating, a scar across his eyebrow, bruises fading to yellow. He walked with a slight limp. He saw Evelyn and stopped. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then he walked over and held out his hand. Mrs. Hartwell. She shook it. His grip was firm but careful. Danny. They sat down at a folding table. Pruitt and Walter stood near the door, giving them space but staying close. Danny was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't remember much from that day. I remember being cold. I remember thinking I was going to die. And I remember a voice, a woman's voice, telling me help was coming. That was me. I know. They told me later. Told me you ran 2 miles to get help, that you came back with bolt cutters, that you kept me alive until the paramedics got there. He looked down at his hands. I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything. Yeah, I do, and I wanted to say thank you. That's all. Just thank you, Bowen. Evelyn took a breath. Your father told me you knew my daughter, Sarah. Danny's expression changed. Pain flickered across his face. Yeah, I knew her. Tell me about her. Why? Because I need to know. I need to know if she mattered to anyone besides me. Danny was quiet for a long time. Then he said, she mattered. She mattered a lot. He leaned back in his chair. I met her at a meeting, NA. This was 6 years ago. I was trying to get clean, failing most of the time, but trying. Sarah was the same. We started talking after meetings, got coffee, talked about everything, life, family, the shit we'd done, the shit we regretted. Did you love her? No, not like that. She was my friend, my sister in a way. She got me, understood what it was like to want to stop and not be able to. He paused. I got her into a program, paid for it with money I didn't have. She stayed 3 days. Then she left, said she wasn't ready. I tried to keep in touch, called her, texted her. She stopped responding. 2 months later, I heard she was dead. And you relapsed. Yeah, I relapsed hard. Stayed high for a year. Almost died twice. Finally got serious about recovery after my old man dragged me to a meeting and told me if I didn't get clean, he was done with me. So I got clean. 4 years now. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she'd been carrying for 5 years. She talked about you once, when she was high. She said there was a guy named Roach who cared about her. I didn't believe her. I thought she was lying. She wasn't lying. I know that now. They sat in silence for a while. Then Danny said, I'm sorry I couldn't save her. You tried. That's more than most people did. It wasn't enough. It never is. Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Evelyn. She unfolded it. It was a photo. Sarah, maybe 30 years old, sitting on a bench outside a coffee shop, smiling at the camera. She looked happy, healthy. It must have been taken during one of her good periods when she was clean and hopeful, and believing that this time would be different. I took that, Danny said, about a week before she left the program. I've carried it with me ever since. I thought you might want it. Evelyn stared at the photo. Her hands were shaking. Thank you. She was a good person, Mrs. Hartwell. The disease didn't change that. Evelyn nodded. She couldn't speak. If she spoke, she'd cry, and she hadn't cried in 5 years. Danny stood up. I should go. I just wanted to say thank you, and to tell you about Sarah. I thought you should know. Wait, Evelyn stood up. The people who did this to you, the Iron Reapers, they're in jail now. I know. Your father gave the sheriff their names. He chose law over revenge. He told me he did that because of me. He did. What happens if they get out? What happens if the charges don't stick? Danny's face went hard. Then we handle it our way. Violence. Justice. There's a difference. Not in our world. Evelyn looked at him, saw the scars, saw the man who tried to save her daughter, saw the criminal, saw both. I don't want more people to die because of this. Neither do I. But I can't make promises about things outside my control. He walked out. Evelyn stood there holding the photo of Sarah, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her again. Walter came over. You okay? I don't know. The town didn't forgive her. Over the next few months, the coldness hardened into something permanent. People crossed the street to avoid her. The general store sold to her but didn't chat. The diner seated her in the back away from the windows. She became a ghost in her own town, present but not acknowledged. Nancy Simmons moved to Eugene. Her house sold for 30% below asking price. People blamed Evelyn. Jim Hollis put up a sign in his store window. We reserve the right to refuse service. He never refused Evelyn outright, but the message was clear. Evelyn stopped going to church, stopped going to the community potlucks, stopped trying to be part of a community that didn't want her. She spent most of her time alone, in the woods, in her cabin, with her memories. And every month on the last Saturday, a small group of bikers rode through Ridgeline, never more than 25. They'd stop at the general store, buy supplies, leave cash on the counter. They'd eat at the diner tip well and leave without causing trouble. They never spoke to Evelyn, never approached her, but she knew they were there because of her, because she'd saved their people. The town hated it, hated the reminder, hated the fact that the bikers kept coming back. But there was nothing they could do about it. 6 months after the incident, Evelyn was diagnosed with depression by a doctor in Eugene. She'd driven there because she didn't want anyone in Ridgeline to know. The doctor prescribed medication. Evelyn filled the prescription and took the pills for 2 months. They made her feel numb, hollow. She stopped taking them. She thought about leaving, selling the cabin, moving somewhere else, starting over. But where would she go, and what would she be starting over from? She was 72 years old. This was her home, even if her home didn't want her anymore. One evening in late April, Walter came by. He had news. The trial's over, he said. All 7 Iron Reapers convicted. Sentences range from 8 to 15 years. Evelyn nodded. Good. There's more. 2 of them made bail before the trial. Tried to run. State police caught them 3 counties over with weapons and a list. Walter's face was grim. The list had names. Garrett's address, Pike's, Harlan's, and yours. Evelyn felt her blood go cold. Mine? You're the one who found them. You're the reason they got caught. In their eyes, you're part of this. He paused. That's why the town's so scared, Evie. Word got out about the list. People know the Iron Reapers had you marked. They're afraid of becoming collateral damage. Why didn't anyone tell me? Pruitt didn't want to scare you. The threat's over now. They're all locked up. But people remember. They're angry because they were scared, and you're the easiest person to blame. Evelyn sat down on her porch steps. Suddenly, Jim's words made more sense. Nancy's fear, the way people looked at her like she'd brought plague to their doorstep. I didn't know, she said quietly. I know, but now you do. And maybe that helps you understand why they reacted the way they did. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made it make sense. One evening in late April, Walter came by with news about Danny. He's getting married, Walter said. Been sober for 4 years. Met a woman at a meeting. They're getting married next month. That's good. Walter looked at her. Really looked at her. Evie, you're not okay. I'm fine. No, you're not. You're disappearing. I can see it. I'm just tired, Walter. You're giving up. She didn't argue because he was right. That night, Evelyn sat on her porch and looked at the challenge coin. She thought about throwing it away. Into the woods. Into the creek. Somewhere she'd never see it again. But she didn't. She held on to it. Because it was the only proof she had that what she'd done mattered. That the choice she'd made, the choice that had cost her everything, had meant something to someone. Even if it didn't mean anything to the town she tried to protect. The winter that followed was the coldest Evelyn could remember. Snow came early in November and didn't melt until March. The cabin felt smaller. The silence felt heavier. She turned 73 in January. Walter brought her a cake. They ate it at her kitchen table and didn't talk much. The bikers stopped coming in December. The roads were too dangerous. But they came back in April when the snow cleared. 23 of them. They came into town, bought supplies, ate at the diner, and left. The same as always. Evelyn watched from her truck parked on a side street. She didn't approach them, didn't want to, but she watched. One of them saw her. A woman maybe 40 years old with long dark hair and a vest covered in patches. The woman walked over to Evelyn's truck and knocked on the window. Evelyn rolled it down. "You're Evelyn Hartwell," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. I'm Cassidy. I ride with the Cascade chapter. I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. Roach is my cousin. You saved his life." Evelyn didn't know what to say. "How is he?" "Good. Really good. He's married now. Got a job at a motorcycle shop in Portland. Still sober. Still going to meetings." Cassidy smiled. "He talks about you sometimes. Says you're the reason he's alive. Says he owes you everything. He doesn't owe me anything. That's not how he sees it. That's not how any of us see it." Cassidy pulled something out of her pocket, a small envelope. "He asked me to give you this, if I saw you." She handed the envelope to Evelyn and walked away. Evelyn sat in her truck and opened the envelope. Inside was a card. On the front, a simple drawing of a pine tree. Inside, in neat handwriting, a message that made her throat tighten. Words about being sober, being married, being alive. Words about second chances and gratitude. Words that ended with a simple truth: none of it would be possible without her. Evelyn read the card 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. She drove home and placed it on the kitchen table next to the challenge coin. That night, for the first time in months, she slept well. The years passed slowly. Evelyn turned 74, then 75. The town's coldness didn't thaw, but it became routine. Expected. She learned to live with it. Learned to find her peace in the woods, in the quiet, in the small rituals that gave her day structure. Walter visited every week, brought groceries, fixed things around the cabin that needed fixing. He didn't talk about the incident anymore. Neither did she. It was just a fact of their lives now. The thing that had happened. The thing that had changed everything. In the fall of her 76th year, something shifted. It started with a wildfire up in the hills north of Ridgeline. It burned for 3 days, driven by wind and drought. The town mobilized. Volunteer firefighters. Evacuation teams. The community center became a shelter for people who'd lost their homes. Evelyn showed up at the shelter on the second day. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait to be invited. She just walked in with her old medical kit and started helping. Treating burns, bandaging cuts, checking vitals, doing what she'd been trained to do. A woman named Patricia Moore, whose house had burned to the ground, looked at Evelyn and said, "Thank you for being here." Evelyn nodded, kept working. Jim Hollis was there too. His store had been spared, but he was helping distribute supplies. He saw Evelyn and stopped. They looked at each other. "Need any help?" Evelyn asked. Jim hesitated. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I could use a hand." They worked side by side for 6 hours, didn't talk much. But something had shifted. A crack in the wall. On the third day, as smoke still hazed the horizon, Jim approached Evelyn during a break. He held 2 cups of coffee, offered her one. "My grandson was in that shelter yesterday," he said. "You treated his burns. He told me you were kind, gentle, made him laugh even though he was scared." Jim looked down at his coffee. "That changed something for me." Evelyn took the cup. "I'm glad he's okay. I owe you an apology for what I said, for how I treated you. I was angry and scared, and I took it out on you. That wasn't right." "It's okay, Jim." "No, it's not, but I'm trying to do better." By the time the fire was contained, Evelyn had treated 47 people. Minor injuries mostly, but she'd been useful. She'd helped, and people had seen it. The coldness didn't disappear, but it eased just a little. Over the next 2 years, Evelyn slowly became part of the community again. Not the way she'd been before. That was gone, but in a new way. Quieter, more careful. People nodded to her in the store, asked how she was doing. Not everyone, but enough. She turned 78, then 79. Her body was slowing down. Her knees hurt. Her back hurt. She couldn't walk the trails as far as she used to, but she still went into the woods, still gathered mushrooms, still found her peace there. The bikers kept coming, every year. Last Saturday in October, the numbers varied, sometimes 15, sometimes 30, never more than 32. They came, they bought, they left. The town accepted Biden. It was just part of Ridgeline now, like the autumn rain, like the Douglas firs, like Evelyn herself. On a Tuesday morning in May, 2 weeks after Evelyn turned 80, there was a knock on her door. She opened it. Danny Stokes stood on her porch. He looked different, older, healthier. His beard was trimmed, his eyes were clear. He was holding the hand of a little girl maybe 7 years old with dark curly hair and bright green eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell," Danny said, "I hope it's okay that we stopped by." Evelyn stared at him, then at the girl. "Who's this?" "This is my daughter, Evelyn. We call her Evie." Danny looked down at the girl. "Evie, this is Mrs. Hartwell, the woman I told you about." The girl stepped forward and held out her hand. "Hi, Mrs. Hartwell. My daddy says you saved his life." Evelyn shook the small hand, felt tears prick at her eyes. "Your name is Evelyn." "Yes, ma'am, I'm named after you." Evelyn looked at Danny. He nodded. "We wanted to honor you for what you did. My wife and I, we talked about it, and we both agreed. If we had a daughter, we'd name her Evelyn." The girl was looking up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy says you're a hero." Evelyn's voice caught. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just an old woman who did what needed to be done." "That's what heroes do," the girl said matter-of-factly. They sat on the porch. Danny told her about his life. His wife Monica, who he'd met at an NA meeting, their home in Portland, his job at the motorcycle shop where he rebuilt vintage bikes, his sobriety now 8 years strong. "I sponsor 12 people," he said. "Help them through the steps. Try to give back what was given to me." "That's good," Evelyn said. "It's because of you, all of it. If you hadn't been in those woods that day, I'd be dead. Monica and I never would have met. Evie wouldn't exist." He paused. "You didn't just save my life. You saved all the lives that came after." Evelyn looked at the little girl who was now playing with a pine cone she'd found on the porch steps. "She's beautiful." "She is. And she's here because you didn't walk away." They stayed for an hour. When they left, Danny hugged Evelyn. It was a careful hug, gentle, the kind you give someone you're afraid might break. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." Evelyn watched them drive away. Then she went inside and sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not sad tears, not entirely, but tears nonetheless. For Sarah, for Danny, for the little girl named Evelyn, for all the lives that had intersected in that clearing 8 years ago. That evening, Walter came by. She told him about the visit. He smiled. "See, what you did mattered." "I know. Because for years you've been carrying the weight of this town's judgment, and I want you to remember that their judgment doesn't define what you did. What you did was right, and that little girl is proof." Evelyn nodded. She felt lighter than she had in years. The summer was warm. Evelyn tended her small garden. Tomatoes, beans, herbs. She read books, listened to the radio, walked in the woods when her knees allowed. In September, she received a package. No return address. Inside was a framed photograph. Danny, his wife, and little Evie standing in front of a motorcycle shop. The sign above them read Stokes Custom Bikes. On the back of the frame, an inscription that made her hands shake as she read it. Words about gratitude and family and everything she'd given them. She placed it on the mantle. Next to the challenge coin, next to the photo of Sarah. October came. The leaves turned, the air got cold, and on the last Saturday of the month, the bikers came. But this year was different. Instead of 20 or 30, there were 67. They rolled into Ridgeline in a column that stretched 3 blocks. The sound was deafening. People came out of their houses, stood on their porches, watched. The bikes stopped in front of the community center. The riders dismounted, and then together they walked to Evelyn's cabin. Evelyn heard them coming, heard the boots on gravel. She stepped out onto the porch. 67 bikers stood in her yard, men and women, young and old, all wearing vests, all silent. At the front was Stokes, the regional president. He was older now, grayer, but still strong, still commanding. Next to him was Danny. Stokes stepped forward. "Mrs. Hartwell, we came to pay our respects." "For what?" "For 8 years of loyalty, 8 years of honoring a debt, but also to tell you something." He paused. "I'm retiring, stepping down as president, and before I do, I wanted to make sure you knew what you mean to this club, what you mean to all of us." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, unfolded it, read aloud. Evelyn Hartwell, on October 24th, 8 years ago, you found 4 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club chained and beaten in the woods. You didn't have to help. You had every reason not to, but you did. You saved 4 lives. One of them was my son. Because of your actions, we are proclaiming you an honorary member of this club. You will be protected. You will be honored. You will be family. Forever. He handed her the paper. At the bottom was a seal. Signatures, 67 of them. Evelyn stared at it, then at the crowd, then at Danny, who was smiling. We don't forget, Stokes said, and we don't abandon family. The bikers stood in silence for a moment. Then one by one they walked past Evelyn. Each one shook her hand, said thank you. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Some didn't, but all of them meant it. When the last one had passed, they mounted their bikes and rode away. The sound echoed through the valley, and then it was quiet again. Evelyn stood on her porch holding the paper, feeling the weight of 8 years lift off her shoulders. Walter came up the driveway. He'd been watching from the road. You okay? Yeah, she said. I think I am. The town saw it. The 67 bikers, the ceremony, the respect, and slowly, grudgingly, something changed. People started to understand that what Evelyn had done wasn't just about saving 4 men. It was about showing mercy, about doing the right thing when it cost everything. Others followed. Not everyone. Some people never forgave her, but enough did. By the time Evelyn turned 81, she'd been welcomed back into the community. Not fully, not the way it had been, but enough. She went to church again, attended potlucks, helped at the shelter when it was needed, and every year on the last Saturday in October, the bikers came. The numbers varied, but they came, and the town accepted it. Evelyn's health began to decline in her 82nd year. Her heart was weak. Her lungs weren't what they used to be. She spent more time sitting on the porch, less time walking in the woods. Walter was there every day, making sure she ate, making sure she took her medication, making sure she wasn't alone. One evening in late November, Evelyn asked him to sit with her on the porch. I need to tell you something, she said. What? I'm not afraid of dying. I used to be. After Tom died, after Sarah died, I was terrified of being alone, of disappearing and having it not matter. But I'm not afraid anymore. Why? Because I know it mattered. What I did, it mattered to Danny, to his daughter, to all those people who came to my door and said thank you. It mattered. Walter took her hand. It did. I don't regret it, any of it, even the hard parts. I know. They sat in silence, watching the sunset through the trees. Evelyn died in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in January. Walter found her. She looked peaceful, like she was just resting. The funeral was held at Ridgeline Community Church. The church was full. People from town, friends, neighbors, and 67 bikers standing quietly in the back, dressed in their vests, holding their helmets. Danny gave the eulogy. His voice shook, but he got through it. Evelyn Hartwell saved my life, he said, but she did more than that. She showed me what it means to have courage, to do the right thing even when it costs you everything. She lost friends. She was judged. She was blamed, but she never regretted it. She told me that herself. And because of her, I'm here. My wife is here. My daughter is here. We exist because she didn't walk away. He paused, looked at the crowd. The world needs more people like Evelyn Hartwell. People who act without hesitation when crisis calls. People who don't look away. People who run toward the emergency instead of away from it. She was one of those people, and we're all better for having known her. After the service, the bikers formed a line outside the church. They stood at attention as the casket was carried out. Then they mounted their bikes and rode in procession to the cemetery, engines rumbling a slow, respectful farewell. Evelyn was buried next to Tom and Sarah. On her headstone, a simple inscription that captured everything she'd been. Inside the casket, tucked into her jacket pocket, was the challenge coin. 3 months after the funeral, the town of Ridgeline dedicated a plaque at the community center. The words were simple but powerful, a reminder of what one person could do, what mercy looked like, what it meant to act when action cost everything. Every year on the last Saturday in October, the bikers still come to Ridgeline. They stop at Evelyn's grave. They leave flowers. They stand in silence. and then they ride away. The town doesn't resent them anymore. They understand now. They understand what loyalty looks like, what gratitude looks like, what it means to honor a debt. Walter lived another 5 years. When he died, he was buried next to Evelyn. He'd requested it in his will. She was my friend, he wrote, and I want to be near her. Little Evie Stokes grew up hearing stories about the woman she was named after. When she turned 18, her father took her to Ridgeline. They visited the grave. Evie placed flowers on the headstone and stood there for a long time. I wish I'd known her better, she said. You carry her name, Danny said. That means you carry her legacy. You carry the lessons she taught all of us. What lesson? That one person can make a difference. That doing the right thing matters. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Evie nodded. She understood. Years later, when Evie became a paramedic, she would tell people about the woman she was named after. The woman who ran 2 miles in the woods to save 4 men she had every reason to hate. The woman who chose mercy over judgment. The woman who paid for that choice with her community's respect but never regretted it. She showed me what courage looks like, Evie would say, and I try to live up to that every day. The story of Evelyn Hartwell became legend in Ridgeline. Parents told it to their children. Teachers taught it in schools. It became part of the town's identity. A reminder that in a world full of easy choices, the hard ones are the ones that matter. And every year when the bikers came through town, people waved. Kids stared. And everyone remembered the old woman who moved with purpose when others froze, who didn't look away, who ran toward the crisis and saved 4 lives. Because that's what heroes do. Not because they're fearless, not because they're perfect, but because when the moment comes when the choice is between easy and right, they choose right. Every time. Evelyn Hartwell chose right. And the echoes of that choice rippled forward through generations. Through Danny's recovery, through his daughter's life, through the 12 people he sponsored, through all the lives they touched. An endless chain of consequence starting with one woman in the woods, holding a walking stick, staring at 4 men chained to a tree, and deciding not to turn away. That's legacy. Not monuments, not plaques, but lives. Changed, saved, continued. And in the end, that's all that matters. The seasons turned in Ridgeline the way they always had. Spring brought rain, summer brought heat, fall brought color, winter brought silence. The town endured, the forest endured, and in the cemetery on the hill, 3 stones stood in a row. Tom, Sarah, Evelyn, 3 lives, 3 stories, connected by blood and loss and love. But it was Evelyn's stone that drew visitors, not just from Ridgeline, from Portland, from California, from places she'd never been, bikers mostly, men and women in leather vests who'd heard the story, who needed to see the place, who wanted to pay their respects to a woman who'd shown them that mercy wasn't weakness, that kindness wasn't foolish, that doing the right thing, even when it cost everything, was the only thing that mattered in the end. They came, they stood, they left flowers, and then they rode away carrying the story with them, telling it in bars and clubhouses and roadside diners, passing it down like scripture. A reminder of what they stood for when they were at their best. Honor, loyalty, debt paid, and somewhere in all of that, a truth that transcended the leather and chrome and noise. That we're all just people, trying to survive, trying to matter, trying to leave something behind that's worth remembering. Evelyn Hartwell left a little girl named Evie who saves lives for a living. She left a man named Danny who helps others find sobriety. She left a community that learned mercy the hard way. And she left a lesson that echoes through the Cascade foothills every October when the motorcycles come. That one moment of courage can change everything. That one choice to help can ripple forward forever. That we are defined not by the easy decisions we make, but by the hard ones. The ones that cost us, the ones that hurt, the ones we make anyway, because they're right.